right, today on the Medical Minute, we are focusing on substance abuse and alcohol use disorder, growing concerns affecting families and communities nationwide. We're joined by Dr. McGee to help us better understand the risks, the warning signs, and the most effective paths to, well, treatment and recovery. Dr. McGee, welcome back to the News Desk. Thank you for your time today.
Hey, thanks. Great to be here.
You got it. So let's start out with the basics. What's the medical definition of alcohol use disorder, and how does it differ from casual or just social drinking?
Okay, so the medical, diagnosis that we use is called the DSM-5 diagnosis, and this criteria we look at, that people have, more than one of these things, right? Maybe they have four, maybe they have three,
Hmm.
but it's drinking for more. The criteria is drinking for more than and longer than intended. Persistent desire to quit drinking, right? But unsuccessful attempts to cut down. Also, spending a lot of time, obtaining or using or recovering from after drinking alcohol. Also, craving alcohol. We look at, does this interfere? Does the alcohol use interfere with work? Does it interfere with your daily activities? Does it interfere how you're parenting your children or paying
Hmm.
bills even? So we start to look at, where it's affecting the social aspect. And then also, is the individual continuing to drink even though we there's these other issues going on, right? Maybe financially, maybe with their job, maybe they've been warned a couple times on their job, but they're still coming in, right? With alcohol or alcohol on their breath. And even though these interpersonal problems are still there, the individual is still, drinking. And also, we look for withdrawal symptoms for whenever they're not consuming the alcohol. So those are some of the biggest things that we look for. And then how the difference is. So casual drinkers, right? They have more of like an occasional drink, maybe on Easter or, the
Hmm.
holidays or something. They'll have a little wine with their family, or they'll have a glass of wine in the evening and it doesn't turn into the whole bottle.
Right.
Or
Yeah.
they'll have some wine with their food and it doesn't turn into, okay, after that, we're going to go to another place, establishment. And, there's a cutoff point. And it's just during those times and it's not affecting or their daily life like their job or anything else, right? So whenever we look at where it's where there's more of a problem, we look at there's a loss of control with that individual. Like we said, they're still drinking even though we know maybe they've gotten a DUI and they're still continuing to drink, and there's this compulsive use, and there's always these negative consequences, right? So they drink, negative consequences, drink, negative consequences. So those are, that's the biggest difference.
Yeah. If you let alcohol consume you, not the other way around. I mean, that's kind of how
Yeah.
I look at it. If you're constantly thinking about alcohol while you're at work or
Yes.
while you're whatever
Yes.
you might be doing in your life, alcohol has to be a part of it. I think you might have a problem.
Or even sometimes people carry around, and I've had patients that do this, carry around alcohol with them on their person, that little bottle. And so, and a lot of
Yeah.
times what's really difficult is they're using it to compensate for anxiety or other
Sure.
circumstances that are going on in their life. So, good
Okay.
questions.
Yeah. Are there any physical warning signs people should look out for that maybe they would need to find out if maybe they've got a relative that has a problem for, let's say, not
Yeah,
only alcohol, but for drug use?
absolutely. And this is such a great question because, what you want to look for in these, patterns is, you know, is their drinking pattern different? Are they drinking more than they used to? Say you
Hmm.
go out together and all of a sudden, you're having a great time, but the person you're with is just, no longer, incoherent. So That would be a change. There's this loss of control. Instead of 1 or 2, it turns into maybe, a six-pack or more. Um, there's, also, there's this increase in tolerance, right? Which is why we're seeing them drink more. So they need more. They need more to, or they feel like they need more to, to have a fun time, right?
Right.
There can also be mood swings, irritability and anxiety can sometimes start to be affected by these. Physical signs, would be those seeing those hangover effects, right? The bloodshot eyes, the I'm a little moody. Sometimes, when it starts to get where it's like really where there's a concern is whenever people start to lose weight. So
Mm.
that's whenever we're kind of like, okay, there's an issue there, and those are the warning signs. Also, like you said, there's this, there's just this, they can't just go and have fun anymore. You know what I mean? It's this, I'm thinking about it. I'm
Right.
thinking about the alcohol. I can't wait to go out. I really, one of the key things that people say is this is not a good thing. When they're stressed and they're like, I just need to go get a drink. I just need to go because that's going to relax me. And sometimes that can lead into, doing that too many times, especially if your
Mm.
job is very
Hmm.
stressful, right? So those are just things. I mean, we say it kiddingly, but there are some people that really are meaning that.
Yeah.
So
Let's talk about genetics and family history. How does that influence someone's risk of maybe having an alcohol or a substance abuse problem?
So genetics account for 40 to 60% of the risk, right? For developing addiction, right? So the family history increases because it's inherited, like we talked about so many times, genetically. And these variants that it's affecting, it's like their alcohol metabolism, right? Which
Okay.
is like we said, this tolerance for alcohol. The tolerance goes higher and higher. And then there's also this brain rewarding system that we look at, and this is more with dopamine. And so, what I like to think of it as, whenever you do something, your brain is like, you get this euphoric feeling, right?
Hmm.
So you get that reward for whenever so you drink and then you get this euphoric feeling, right? Like it's like, "Oh, I feel better." You know what I mean? "Oh, I'm having fun. I've loosened up," right?
Yeah.
But
Yep.
sometimes that system, it keeps going and it gets stronger and it gets stronger. And then it's also affecting that stress response. So, like I said, whenever we're thinking, oh, I just need that drink. Okay, this is how I handle my stress. I got to go get a beer. I got to go, you know what I mean? And that's when we start to, that affects that. That's more genetically. Can it be environment too? If you've seen your dad do that, right?
Yeah.
Or, mom, I just need a glass of wine, right? So that's where that is more affected. And then the environment, is like I'm just saying, like, if you're seeing it, what we're seeing is early exposure, to children who have parents who are alcoholic or have a, substance use disorder. They are more prone to see this is how this is a good coping skill for me. This is how I cope with this situation. And so that's kind of where we're looking at with that family history and that,
Okay.
environmental effect.
Dr. McGee, when should someone seek medical help for themselves or maybe for a loved one?
So when to seek help would be more whenever it is when it's of interfering when it's interfering with their life and it's starting to their daily life, like say like we just talked about, they're not going to work like they should. They're not, they're not getting up. They need a phone call. um Red flags are, they're they're getting in trouble with the law, right?
Hmm.
I got a DUI, but and I really need to work, but I can't stop drinking. So that's really basically saying there's a loss of control going on, right? So then we also look for these physical signs because even though, this behavior, these strong urges, these inability to cut down, I said I was going to quit drinking, but I just can't. We look at, this tolerance, like we said, the withdrawal symptoms. People start to get shaky, sweaty when they try to quit. So they're trying to quit and they start to get all this nausea, anxiety, and all these other things. They say you wake up with the shakes, right? So that's a big warning sign of, if my loved one is doing that, I need to try to help them to get some help for themselves. There's a change in the mood, they're all of a sudden, depressed or there's a lot of anxiety. It could be, that they're feeling shameful because, they don't like the person they've become. And they keep saying, I'm going to quit, but there's just not that follow through with that quitting. Behavior things too is like we talked about work, family responsibilities, who paid the bills, who
Yeah.
bought the groceries,
Yep. Sure.
all of these things are so important, and sometimes, unfortunately, what you look for too is this, lying about drinking, right? Sometimes they'll tell their spouse, "Hey, yes, I did quit. I'm not drinking anymore." But then they're hiding, the spouse might be looking under the sink and find a bottle or find something, and whenever people start to hide liquor, that's a really big red flag. So, if you see this with your loved one where they're getting this Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, whenever there's substances involved, right? That's also a big red flag. One day they're just wonderful. We cleaned the garage together, everything was great. And then by evening time, they're just, "Don't bother me, leave me alone. I'm in my garage and just shutting the door and don't want anything." So these really big mood swings is what we see too with substance use disorder. Because if there's a craving and it's starting to affect them physically, sometimes they're going to take it out on, first of all, the people they love the most. So
Yeah.
those are all
Absolutely.
signs, yeah, to start talking and having that honest discussion.
Let's talk about some common misconceptions about addiction that you wish more people kind of understood.
So a lot of times people say this saying, they're going to hit rock bottom, right? We always say they're
Hmm.
going to hit rock bottom, or I'm waiting for them to hit rock bottom, right? And rock bottom is usually means that there's more harm coming to them, there's more trauma, there's more loss. And, many people, we don't want them to get these severe consequences before they so some people don't have a rock bottom, you know? Some people's rock bottom might be death, So we don't
Yeah.
wanna go with that when they hit rock bottom theory. There also is, addiction is a lack of willpower. So a lot of people, sometimes whenever they don't understand why a person just can't quit, right? Because they're like, "Hey, I can drink like this and I can just quit and it's fine." And they just can't come to realize that, it's not a lack of willpower. So what's happening is addiction affects the brain, right? Like we talked about. And whenever this happens, the neurons in the brain start to want that alcohol. It's like, and that's where we get this addiction. I like to look at it as we have a well of dopamine, right? In our
Hmm.
brain. And this little well, whenever we start to, take too much from it, because we're getting that euphoric feeling over and over and over, and we're
Right.
pulling from that well. Well, that well gets empty and it wants to be filled. And then there's that feeling of, I need this, I need this, I need this to be filled. And if they don't get it, sometimes they're, stealing from others and doing things that you've never thought that person would do because there is a chemical imbalance in the brain. So we can't just look at addiction like it's just the lack of willpower. It really isn't. We also say, if they really wanted to stop, they would. Right? That's another one. If they really wanted this, they would do it. Well, many people do want to stop, and they just can't. They like I said, it's not that they lack the willpower, it's not that anything like that. It's like now this has turned into a physical, actual, problem, which is why we have substance use disorder as a medical condition that we
Yeah.
treat, right? So this is why we have to kind of think of these individuals like something is going on neurologically, and we got to help them to where they're, what I mean, where they're functioning 100% again. And then, another thing that people think is once you're done, you went through treatment, you're good for life, and it doesn't always happen like that,
No, no.
unfortunately. These individuals have such a high relapse. There's always something that could trigger them to go back into that old, way that they were so used to. So there's so much therapy and there's so much, getting that person. It's almost like you're reconstructing their behaviors again. And that's a good thing. You know what I mean? Because it's like I'm learning how, think of it like this. I ate bad all a long time, right? And I became a diabetic. And
Hmm.
I started to learn how to eat healthy. Now I'm a good diabetic and I have a better A1C and I lost weight and I'm doing great. And it's the same way you have to look at this addiction, substance use disorder. Um, they were doing something bad for their body for a long time, and it has an impact on the body and it affects different areas of the body. So now we get them better, but it's a continual,
Yeah,
way
you
that
got to
we have
work
to
on it day to
continue to
day.
work on it. Yeah,
Yep.
absolutely.
Let's
So
talk about treatment approaches. What's the difference between inpatient, outpatient, and medication assisted treatment, and how important is counseling and therapy in your recovery process?
I love this question. so, um,
Hmm.
so basically, so inpatient is residential where we have an individual that stays in a facility, right? Where we can give them continual care. Sometimes when people have, I'll give you an example. An individual say that drunk for 6 months straight. And they, they're an alcoholic so we'd have them inpatient because now we have to worry about them having seizures. Because when they start to withdraw, their whole nervous system is affected. So
Yeah.
it's not a normal kind of, hey, you can just quit. No, the body starts to react and want that alcohol. So we have to give them medications to kind of help them get better. When you're looking at outpatient, it's more where people can come during the day. They get, their therapy, they get treatment, and then they can go home and they're feeling all better. Now, inpatient's the same way where they're getting inpatient counseling and treatment and group therapy. And then you have, the other one, which you said counseling and the group therapy. It's so
Hmm.
important because it reduces their relapse rates whenever individuals go to these group therapy, because more than likely you're going to find somebody that's in the same boat you are,
Yeah.
and that person can be a lifeline. you know I'm having a really bad day today, and basically talk them off the edge whenever they're having those bad days. So it's so important to get around your peers. Sometimes your peers actually help you heal. But then also talking about, for the counseling, talking about what are the triggers? What are the triggers that are causing, you know, this individual to want to go back to, what I mean, go back to drinking, and how do we stop that trigger? How do we come up with something more therapeutic for them to do to release their frustration or whatever they're feeling and their emotions, where it can be a healthy way to deal with our emotions. And it's a lot of behavioral therapy, but it's a lot of physical also, where we need to make sure they're seeing their doctor too, to make sure that, whatever, their blood pressure or their heart, or if anything's been affected. And I know you have a great question about that too, how it affects the body.
Yeah.
Wow. So,
Yeah.
did you
If you
want to
could.
talk about that?
Yeah, for sure. I wanted to talk about how it could affect the body and the brain.
Yes, yes, yes. I love that question. It's such a good question because there is so much that is affected with alcohol, and I'm gonna go back to it. Okay, so, um, whenever you have this long-term use, right, and we talked about
Hmm.
the brain already, so there starts to be this nervous system change, where we're talking about, that dopamine well, right? And it can lead to impaired memory, attention, and even decision making because, we haven't gotten the treatment that we need, right? So this is for an individual that hasn't got treatment and they have long-term use. They also have, the increase of depression and anxiety because they're still getting these alcohol, related symptoms after, say a hangover or, whatever. But our biggest thing is they start to lack their vitamins, especially vitamin B. And vitamin B is so important. Their liver starts to be affected. So one of the things that they get is called a fatty liver. And they can also get hepatitis, cirrhosis, liver failure. All of those kind of go hand in hand with alcoholism. They could also go with substance use disorder depending on what, they're using. So, the body is deeply affected by this. The heart, where we were talking about, is it basically causes strain on that heart, right? And it causes strain on our vessels. So this leads to the high blood pressure, right? So whenever the heart is trying to pump the blood, we pump out oxygenated blood to go into our body, and then we're getting back deoxygenated blood. Well, when these individuals are not, their heart is just not pumping as it should, they can start to see where they're getting these red spots on their legs. We call venous insufficiency because the blood flow isn't able to come back up like it should. So we also can see a lot of differences in their skin,
Hmm. Hmm.
anemia. Um, the liver supplies us with our blood. So when we start to hurt the liver, it starts to show its effects. And,
Yeah.
there is a point where they could turn it around. The other thing, last thing I'll name is, there's always this gastritis also. So whenever individuals drink too much alcohol, they start to thin their stomach lining. And that stomach lining also goes through the intestines, and they start to thin out those areas. And, they're at more higher risk of the ulcers and other things because whenever you're putting alcohol into an empty stomach, it's going to eat the lining and then it's going to become more acidic. And then the next day, when they wake up, they're wondering, oh, why does my stomach hurt so much?
Mm.
Why is this
Hmm.
just, because, if you drank on an empty stomach, your lining was eaten and, the alcohol is just not a good food to put in there. So I will say if people are drinking, try to eat something, but these individuals, they're not thinking like that, and they're just waking up and having that beer.
Moderation is key. Leave you with this, Doc. One, I got two things. One, who was the
Uh-huh.
joker that gave the acronym substance use disorder? That's SUDS, right? Hey, let's use
I
SUDS
know.
for.
I don't know. You know what? I never thought of it like that.
Yeah,
Honestly, but
and then
yeah. Well, they
uh,
don't,
uh,
they wanted to get away from calling people alcoholics or,
sure.
and they thought that was the better way to, yeah.
Well, let's get into some SUDS, I guess. But
Right.
nonetheless, one final
Yeah.
question for you, Doc. What is one message that you wish everyone understood about addiction, if you could?
So I would say that, look at addiction. It's not a choice of the individual. Sometimes it's a chronic medical and behavioral issue that this individual is going through.
Hmm.
And look at that individual as, they can't just snap out of it. They can't just, sometimes we need to help that person and form a circle around them and help them get better. And they really need, one of your questions was how can family support? Family can
Hmm.
absolutely support by, being a positive enforcement, helping them get into treatment, the counseling, everything else that they need, and especially the medication. A lot of people don't want to take medication for some disorders, but it really is beneficial, and I've seen amazing results from it.
Okay, well, Dr. McGee, thank you so much. I sure appreciate it. Again, if you'd like to watch this again, you can find it on our Facebook page, or rather our web page, and we'll get the full episode there. Doc, thank you so much. Have yourself a great week. It's too bad that we didn't get a chance to move on with our Chicago Bear team, but hey, listen, we've got a
I
bright
know.
future in
Yeah,
front of us, right?
absolutely. And next year, watch out. We might be the champs.
I think
So
so.
I think we got a young team that just needs a little bit of, help, and they'll get that
Little
with this
time,
good
little
coach.
help. Real quick, how's the weather there? You got any snow? You got any coming this weekend?
Storming today. Yeah, storming today. Lots of snow. Yeah,
Okay.
yucky.
All right. Doc, have a great 2 weeks. We'll catch up with you again soon, okay?
All right, have a great one. All right, bye.